Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Joe Emilio Show. Thank you all for tuning in. I don't feel afraid to say hi in the comment section. You're more than welcome to. Tonight I'm going to be live with a very special guest. I've been wanting to have him on the show for a very long time, and I'm so excited that he's finally here. But before I bring him on, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to go check out these things that I'm going to tell you. Firstly, if you want to donate and support the channel, please feel free to go to the link in the description below, where there's various options where you can do so. There's Zapper, there's Quicket, there's Bitcoin. Just have a field day, choose whichever one, but don't feel obligated that you have to. Also, don't be afraid to also go check out rebelstoreZA.com. Some great merchandise on that website. And then, ladies and gentlemen, if you're new to the channel, please like this video. It goes a long way. And also subscribe to the channel if you're new. I've got some great content coming your way pretty soon. And if you want up-to-date information about the channel and what I'm up to, check out the Telegram channel. There's a link in the description. It's just a channel. It's not a group. Don't worry. You're not going to get weird memes every now and again and be bothered. It's only when I have an upcoming stream or upload, you'll be notified that it's out, because YouTube doesn't always notify you. So yes, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for tuning in. I see some people already in the chat. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, Amy. Welcome, Mario. Welcome, Yanni. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'm going to introduce the man of the hour, the one you guys are all here to see, and hopefully we'll have a very interesting conversation. Like I said, I've been, I just couldn't wait to have this guy on the show. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, the one, the only, Mr. Kanthan Pillay.
Evening, all. How are you guys doing?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm freaking fabulous. You know, I live in the best country in the world with the worst government in the world. So all things work out.
Yeah, I live in, I don't know, you must be in a very nice area of that country, because I'm in the same country. It's beautiful. It's definitely a beautiful country.
I'm in Gauteng. I'm in Gauteng. This is Africa's financial capital. We provide the money line that keeps you guys in Cape Town afloat. Because without us, your economy would just simply shut down. And yes, please tell Amy I said hello right back.
Okay, that's an interesting conversation. So let's actually start with that. So I've heard that before, right? I've heard that Joburg, kind of helps out Cape Town or whatever. But Cape Town recently has been, well, not Cape Town, obviously. There's been a lot of murmurs in Cape Town, in the Western Cape, specifically about secession. Wasn't really planning on chatting to you about this, but seeing as this kind of popped up, opinion? Do you have an opinion on that?
Look, I'm a great fan of the idea of having decentralized power as far as possible. So secession certainly ticks a number of boxes at that level. So, the whole concept in terms of the Cape Independence, guys, hey, I think it's a great initiative. I don't think it has a hope in hell of succeeding, just simply because a lot of the boxes that need to be ticked in terms of the standards that are required by the UN in order for it to come about, it's going to be really difficult for people to be able to prove, because, you have to prove, coherent culture, historical links, and all of that kind of stuff. But the idea of actually trying to take as much power away from the central government and, be largely autonomous. We need true federalism in this country, and we don't have that yet. So, yes, I'm completely supportive of the guys who are certainly involved in the initiative.
Interesting. I'm glad to hear that you say you like federalism. As we all know, United States definitely follows or tries to follow that way of governance. Do you really think federalism would work in South Africa?
Well, tell me where it doesn't work.
I think there's too much diversity in South Africa. So much so that, I look at the United States, for example, and something about the United States, I don't know, maybe it's the culture, something about it where, each state may not like each other. It's like some states make fun of other states and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, if you hurt an American, or you hurt America, everyone bands together. There's this patriotism in America that is very, very strong. or at least it used to be very, very strong. I don't sense that same South African patriotism unless the Boca win the world championship.
You see, these things kind of go through phases. Interestingly, when I was at university in the US, because I majored in political science at Princeton, and
Yes.
one of the things that I was looking at was in terms of American politics, and one of the questions that was put by the professor at the time, because we were looking at American politics in general with an emphasis to Latin American politics. And he was asking the question, why is it that you had a scenario where Mexico, for example, actually had the first university in all of the Americas? Argentina had a number of firsts in terms of, so there were a number of boxes that got ticked in terms of who had the first post offices, who had the first postal services, who had the first international trade. And in nearly all of those cases, the United States was a laggard. And yet suddenly you had the scenario where towards the end of the 19th century, and then certainly for all of the 20th century, the United States just completely dominated the world. And he was asking for an explanation as to why that was the case. Why is it that the United States was able to pull together and end up in the scenario where they had exactly that spirit that you're talking about, that, if anyone in the world happened to so much as give them a glance in the wrong way, then the entire country would pull together. And it turned out that this was a question that he asked almost every class every single year. And I was the first person to actually crack an A for that particular class. Because I said, well, the answer is very simple. You had a civil war. And the result of that civil war was so incredibly brutal that it literally turned brothers against brothers, fathers against sons. Obviously at that time, we didn't have the sort of equality of violence that we have today. So women were not fighting in the same way at the time. Yeah. But if you consider, just the blood on the streets of the entire country coming out of the American Civil War, what that did was it forced a scenario where Americans were just so wary of going down that route again that they actually pulled together as a nation. So when I got to the US in 86, you could not talk politics with the Americans because, sitting around the dinner table, if I'd asked them, so, who you guys going to vote for? And it was like, you've asked a taboo question. It's kind of like asking Amakosa what happens at initiation ceremonies. That exactly that look. That's what I ended up getting. So so it was the Civil War thing. We were a lot in the same scenario because we came literally to the brink in terms of this country tearing itself apart, and then came 1994, and then we had a breathing space in terms of the Rainbow Nation. But obviously the conflict in our case was largely imagined because we never had a war to speak of, really. And so the entire concept of the Rainbow Nation, thanks to the Bell Pottinger guys among us, very quickly fell apart. And so here we are today. But I think by and large, the values that pulled us together at the time, there's a significant chunk of the country, I would say the majority, that still ascribes to those values, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there are some people that obviously want to live the best life they can. They want to work hard, provide for their family, all that. I just think that I think I've been here in South Africa for 14 years. And every time I meet someone new, they always tell me two things. It's always, what are you doing in South Africa? And then the government sucks. It's always those two statements, because I think most South Africans have lost faith in the system and even to some extent their country. Even though, as I said, I love this country and I think it's beautiful. I do love the people. I do agree with you when you say, worst government. It's very difficult for me to believe that federalism will work when, I don't know. I think that may lead to South Africa breaking apart completely. So you won't have necessarily a whole South Africa. You'll have the Western Cape, whatever they turn their name into, a other provinces will just break away from South Africa and they'll all become their own little countries. I think that might happen in the future.
And you base this on what?
Just again, the Zulu Kingdom wanting to also get secession. Western Cape sick and tired of ANC. Western Cape has probably the most diverse population in South Africa. If there's any rainbow nation, it's in Cape Town or Western Cape. And the cultures are different. I think everyone by nature sticks to the ones that they like, or they're I want to say they're kin, if I can say that, or they're like-minded. Like people who are like-minded will stick together. The cultures will stick together, and it just will naturally evolve like that. I do think that the whole idea of a rainbow nation is a farce. I think that was something that was sold at the beginning in 1994, and everybody loved it, and it was a great idea. But the ANC have killed it, in my opinion. You seem very shocked.
No, not at all. I was waiting for a question.
Oh.
Look, I'm certainly not going to shoot down your ideas because, I can perfectly understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
And it's something that I come across quite often. I don't necessarily agree with it, but at the same time, I'm not here to proselytize for the Rainbow Nation.
Yes.
I do take a view. I'm surprised that people ask you why you're in South Africa, because I know a number of people who have come to South Africa very specifically in the post-94 era, because it fundamentally is one of the most awesome places in the world, barring the government. Yeah, I do think that, we have a level of creativity, a level of ingenuity, we've got a work ethic, all of that stuff that exists in spite of government. Yeah. So at that level, I know, personally, lots of people who've actually ended up making their home out here from other countries. And I think that's great. My entire viewpoint on immigration always has been that you need to encourage people who can actually add to the intellectual capital of the country, because that was America's greatest strength. It wasn't letting the hoi polloi in over the South Mexican border. It was actually cherry picking the best that the world had to offer. Unfortunately, our current regime doesn't actually have the noggin to be able to do that type of thing.
Yeah, unfortunately. Look, I think if South Africa did somehow manage to pull off federalism, then and everybody was happy, then kudos. I think it would work out better than the current system that we have. I think not any party that's in power other than the ANC, definitely not ANC or EFF. But I would love to see. I'm dying to see another party take over. I'm currently, and I've said
I can see where this conversation is going at this point.
Yeah. I'm between three parties, and I've been kind of on a mission on this channel to interview people like yourself, interesting people, also somewhat politically inclined, and get to know them on a personal level. I've had DA, I've had ZACP, some members from the ZACP. Now the big chief is with me of ZACP. And I want to ask you about the ZACP, if you don't mind. They seem to have been very quiet over the past year. Now I understand lockdown may have had a part to play in that. Totally understandable. But where is it? Is it still around? Does it even exist at this point?
Well, it depends on how you define exist. If you mean, are we took a view pretty much at the time of the 2019 elections that we were not going to be a party of press releases. Because, frankly, there's nothing more pathetic than that you just simply issue statements every so often condemning everything, but it doesn't really provide anyone with anything other than yet another pivotal point for outrage. And that was never the essence of what we were trying to do with the ZACP. What we were trying to do was to actually get people thinking in exactly the opposite direction in terms of what are the real solutions that we can actually be offering that everyone can kind of coalesce around and say, hey, this makes sense. This can actually work for us. And given the fact that the basis under which we got there, which was that we were 10 independent South Africans from all walks of life who essentially had already had very successful careers in the private sector, which meant that we were bringing real world experience to bear, which most people in Parliament don't have. I mean, you take the leaders of all of the major political parties. They've never actually held down a job in their days, in their lives. Every single one of these parties. They've never managed people. They've never had to pull a business back from the brink of extinction. And this was really the thing that set us apart from nearly everyone else who was playing in this space. But the nature of playing in that space is because we're not professional politicians. It does mean that we have to actually go back to doing stuff that allows us to go back to earning a living, right? Because we're not dependent on. It would be a really a dick move for us to tell people, okay, now start paying us money so that we can draw salaries from you, because no, that wasn't the reason why we started this thing in the first place. And the entire idea at the time that we wanted to get a handful of people into Parliament and to basically rock the boat with these ideas that cut across party lines and could pull everyone together. So now this year we've got the municipal elections coming up yet again. And the municipal elections are an entirely different beast to the national elections. National elections, we run on a proportional representation system. So in the national elections, you're not really undermining another party. Okay, because you see, the idea is that if you have voters who suddenly decide that we're not going to vote for the ANC, we're going to vote for the EFF, ultimately there's still seats that are getting awarded. So it's not at the expense of other players. So if people wanted to say, well, I was thinking of voting DA, but I'm now going to vote ZACP, ultimately it's fine, because on the assumption that ZACP and the DA end up getting in, I think that there's going to be a commonality of core issues on a number of points. That means that the average voter is not going to be done a disservice by the fact that there's a ZACP person in versus a DA person in. If you look in terms of the distinctions that ZACP has with the DA, well, we absolutely in favor of freedom of speech without any exception. We don't believe in Black economic empowerment or any form of thing other than a meritocracy. We're very clear on the question of gun rights. Simple stuff like that. But
I've met a lot of the individuals on ZACP, Gideon Hubert being one of them. So I know your position on gun rights. Absolutely. And I agree with them.
But it's a principal position, because I tell people I don't carry a firearm.
Yeah, no, I understand. It's about the right to protect yourself.
Yes.
The right
because do I think that people should trust themselves rather than the government? Because the government in this particular case, our police officers with as many criminals among their ranks are far more likely to be the problem than the solution.
Absolutely, yeah.
But so going back to the question of now, if we have to look at a scenario where the ZACP contests the municipal elections, it becomes a very different scenario, because when you're contesting an election on a ward basis, then you're very likely to end up diluting the vote. So, for example, if the ZACP is contesting an election in a ward that, let's say, the Freedom Front Plus, for example, happens to have to hold that particular ward, the likely scenario, as far as I'm concerned, is that we'll end up diluting the vote that would otherwise have gone to the Freedom Front Plus, which might mean very likely that we'd end up handing that ward to the ANC. And so that's a real philosophical issue for us in the ZACP, that because our entire idea is not to disrupt things in favor of entrenching whatever power the ANC already has around the country. But to actually end up creating platforms. So, obviously I'm just speaking from my perspective on this, because I've yet to canvass with my colleagues in the ZACP on what their thoughts are on this. But, by and large, when we last spoke about this, that was kind of the broad brushstrokes, that we took a view that the time that we'll get back into the scenario is going to be ahead of the next national elections. Okay. And I think right now that's pretty much the case.
All right. Yeah, I think that's also what people are wondering. I've spoken to a lot of people who know about your party and they love your party, and I've been wondering, but when are we going to start hearing about you guys? But it sounds like you just said, the national elections is when you guys will start, hopefully ruffling some feathers and making some noise. I hope to see that. May I ask you one more question about the ZACP? Why a cow?
A purple cow, very specifically. Yeah. The purple cow, it was a marketing ploy, and it came directly from Seth Godin, who's a kind of doyen of advertising. Really smart guy. But my wife, Dr. Sarah Britton, was handling a lot of our media strategy at the time, and she came up with the idea of using a purple cow as the symbol, because Seth Godin actually wrote a book called The Purple Cow. Okay. And the point is that because a purple cow is something so unusual, it is immediately going to stand out, and you will never forget it. It's like if I come to you and I say, Joe, do your best to not think of a pink elephant.
You think of a pink elephant.
Yep. Yeah. And you're hosed immediately, so you can't unsee that pink elephant that's now floating in your brain. Now, purple cow, well, firstly, purple is a color of prosperity, by and large. Cow is the symbol of wealth across all of sub-Saharan Africa. And you take it to the stock market, bulls and bears.
Yeah.
Cow represents, it's a bull market. So it ticked all of those boxes at that level. And, the idea was that when you were looking at that ballot paper, you wanted something that's going to jump out at you that is just completely distinct.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. And you can't miss the purple cow.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, the first time I found out you guys had a purple cow mascot, or it was your symbol, your emblem, whatever you call it, I was like, that's different. That is very, very, very different. And like you said, memorable.
Cool. Franz Cronier, said that was probably the smartest thing from a marketing perspective that he'd come across in a long time, which was high praise. But I think he was right. Mm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just very quickly, I want to say hi to some of the new viewers that have tuned in. Everyone's saying, some people tuning in and saying House has sent me. So thank you, Ronaldo House, for sending some of your viewers over to the show to watch Kanthan and I have a little bit of a chat. It's a very casual chat. For those of you just tuning in, I have Kanthan Pillay, as you can see, head of the ZACP, entrepreneur, and all-around great guy. All right, let's move away from politics for a bit. I want to get to know you, Kanthan. So you mentioned you've been in the States. You studied at Princeton. Well done. That's well done. What is something that people don't know about you? We know you're a media guy. We know that you run this ZACP now, but what do people not know about you?
What do people not know about me? Probably a heck of a lot. Look, the truth of the matter is that I'm actually an incredibly private person by and large, in terms of most of the things that really excite me. Okay. So I think most people kind of know the broad brushstrokes that I've had a career in the media. Most people don't know that I spent a chunk of my life working as a computer scientist.
Wow! Okay.
Yeah. So and doing really cool stuff there. So I was first at the program in applied and computational mathematics at Princeton, where we did some seriously cool tech at the time that we were playing with, and we beat out the rest of the country to what at the time was a really significant grant from the U.S. Department of Defense. Mm-hmm. And then I got headhunted to help set up a research center in Sardinia, which is, so moved from the U.S. across to Sardinia and was there for a couple of years. In fact, that's where my eldest daughter was born.
Oh, okay, fantastic.
Yeah, and then got back to the country in '94. I have a massive vinyl collection. I have a massive collection of comics.
Comics. Okay. Well, you can see I'm kind of a comic book fan myself. Okay. Quick question on the comic thing. Marvel or DC?
DC.
Well, I kind of expected that, to be honest. I don't know why.
DC, DC is cerebral. Marvel is all about, the guy's got superpowers, but he's still trying his best to impress the girl.
Yeah, it's relatable.
Yeah, and you see the comparison in terms of the Marvel universe and the DC universe. In the Marvel universe, there's no consequences. You literally have. Thanos destroys the entire universe, and then poof, snap of fingers, everything gets back to normal. There are no consequences. Ultron tears all of New York City apart, and guess what? There's no blood that you see. There are no bodies with assegais sticking out of them. DC universe, there's real consequences. You watch the start of Batman versus Superman. And Batman is literally watching the buildings come down with some of his best friends in there, and they are dying. And it's kind of a mirror of what went down in the US with the Twin Towers. Real life consequences. So there are essentially, you have the Marvel universe, which has individuals who are gifted with powers but want to live ordinary lives. And in the DC universe, you literally have gods who walk the earth and are dealing with matters of galactic consequence. That certainly ticks my boxes.
Yeah, no, DC definitely has a more gritty, dark kind of tone to it, if I can put it that way. It's always been known for that. I do enjoy DC. I do. I mean, I don't hate DC. Definitely not. I enjoy Batman. I enjoy Superman. I'm not a fan of the cinematic universe of DC. I like the animation of DC. I think it's really good. I prefer the MCU when it comes to cinematic universes, though. But I imagine you kind of think they're popcorn movies.
But they're fun,
Yeah.
But I love the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's really cool to watch, and it drives enough people to believe that Wakanda could be a real thing. Hey, that's awesome.
Oh boy! All right, cool. So you like comic books. You have this. Wait, I gotta ask you this question. So here we have Ronaldo House tuning in, asking, Dead Venom.
Both, definitely both. I love them both.
Yeah, that's a hard choice. That is a hard choice. But Deadpool, you can't really compare Deadpool to Venom.
But look, visually, Venom is much cooler, right? You could admit.
That is true. That is very true. I think the toughest villains for me to choose between is Venom or the Joker, specifically Heath Ledger's Joker. I like them both as villains. Yeah, I don't know. What did you think of Heath Ledger's Joker?
I thought Heath Ledger's Joker was really cool, but I also think that they probably would have judged it more harshly if Heath Ledger had not met an untimely end. So I think that, there's this kind of like a halo effect that comes in from that, de mortuis nil nisi bonum and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think, it was a good performance either way. I think
so. But what do you think? What do you think of Jared Leto's Joker?
I didn't. You know what? When I first watched it, okay, I wasn't sold. Then I watched it again like years later. I think 2 years later, and I was like, "Why is this growing on me?"
You're probably one of the few people in the world now who has not seen Justice League: The Snyder Cut.
No, I haven't yet. I want to see it. I want to see it.
All right, yeah,
I want to see it. Okay,
it'll be a good 4 hours. It's worth it. It'll be a good 4 hours.
That's the problem. It's 4 hours. Did you sit straight through the 4 hours, or did you have a break?
No, I sat straight through the 4 hours. Fantastic. I mean, look, if you could spend 6 hours on sex, what's 4 hours on a movie, right?
Fair enough. Fair enough. That's a good rebuttal. I can't argue with that one. All right. All right, Kanthan. So let's move away from the Marvel and the comic book situation here. Let's delve more into, and this is something I wanted to ask you as well. I'm sure you've been asked this a lot, but I wanted to know from the cow's mouth, if I can put it that way. What happened with eNCA?
Well, I think you know what happened with the NCA.
Well, I'll tell you the brief that I understand. I
right.
understand that you wrote a tweet, wasn't well, what people thought it was a bad tweet. You apologized for the tweet and you were let go from eNCA. That's basically, I know. In my personal opinion, if I may, I don't think that tweet was terrible. I saw nothing wrong with it. I was like, it's an opinion. The man has a right to have an opinion. But yeah, that's how I see it. What's your, what can you say about it?
Look, what I can say is that I apologize for the tweet because I took one for the team. And I said to the CEO at the time, I said, look, I'll apologize for this. It's not going to work. Trust me on this. But, the one thing that I was very clear about, and I said this to him up front, look, I'm not going to pull this organization down. So if you think that actually handling the fallout from this is going to be too much, then just tell me and I'll walk. Because, I keep telling people that ultimately, in any organization, there's only one CEO. And the CEO has to make the call in terms of what's in the best interest of the business. And those of us who end up working for that particular CEO, in whatever context, in as much as we may have different opinions, it's not our job to second guess the call. Because the reason why the board has put the CEO in place is to actually make those calls. So, would I have made the call differently in that same scenario? Probably. But do I disagree with his right to make that call at that particular time? Absolutely not. Yeah.
Was it difficult though? I mean, I imagine you loved what you did. You were head editor, if I understand correctly.
Look, it was, kind of going back to where I started from to some extent, because I had originally been running what was then ETV News. This was before eNCA actually started. And I took over running ETV News just after 9/11.
Okay.
And that was, just the entire world was falling apart at that stage. The guy who was head of news at the time actually, cracked under the stress, really, to speak of. And I got tossed into the hot seat. At the time, we were sitting at roughly half of SABC's audience at the time that I took over. In 6 months' time, we had caught up with the SABC. By the time I left ETV News a few years later, we were sitting at double SABC's audience. In fact, they had to end up canceling their 8 o'clock bulletin and moving it to 7 o'clock to compete with us because no one was watching their news bulletin anymore. So,
Nice.
So again, in the context of eNCA, I was brought in to get the numbers up, and I was given a year to do it, and I did it pretty much in the 3 months that I was there.
Wow.
Yeah.
May I ask how? Like, was it a case of like? Don't go into detail, but what I mean is like we see a lot nowadays.
Look, it's stuff that I've spoken about in the past. That consider, for example, that when I went to the Cape Times, which was in 1997, I went on there as managing editor, and the paper, as managing editor, I was basically responsible for running the finances, and the paper turned a profit for the first time in 15 years. And at the same time, we pushed our circulation to over 60,000 copies at the time. Now, currently, I think the Cape Times is selling around about 12,000, if that.
Wow.
But the entire premise around how you actually build audience is it's credibility. And credibility comes from not trying to spin stuff for your audience. Because if you work on the assumption that the audience is smart enough to draw their own conclusions, then give them facts and let them actually trust you that you're providing them with facts. And that's how you actually build credibility with your audience. So there's a lot of stuff that I did that actually pissed off a lot of people and stuff. For example, I told anchors to stop editorializing. People are here to get the news. They're not here for your opinion, much as you might think that your opinion is something significant. That's still the case, wherever you happen to be.
Yeah. I've noticed that. I feel like when you watch the news now, whether any news like SABC, all of them do the same thing. Depending on which side of the coin they're on, they'll kind of say something like, look at what happened in this scenario. It is this man that did X, Y, and Z. So you've already made the audience look at something from a particular set of goggles, if I can put it that way. So when they watch whatever image or footage, they already have taken the anchor's word for what is happening and they run with it in their minds. And I think you're kind of controlling people's perception, and I think that's wrong. Whereas journalism, I would say maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, wasn't like that. They would just stick to the facts. This is what happened, and here's what happened. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, after we've seen that footage, ladies and gentlemen, we found out that we spoke to man X, and he says this is what happened, but we also spoke to man E, who says this is what happened. We're going to get to the bottom of this. They would tell the story like that with facts, and I feel like they don't do that anymore. They're trying to just shove this very left leaning ideologies down our throats.
Yes, I think the problem is that a lot of the people who made their way into journalism ended up coming up through the likes of Rhodes University. From the shithole formerly known as Grahamstown, whatever it's called now. And I guess they were taught this whole idea of crusading journalism. And my entire viewpoint on that, look, I mean, understand that I became a journalist because I got expelled from the University of Durban Westville in 1980. And I was doing a BSc because I wanted to end up in medical school like a good Indian and, do that type of stuff. But, there we are at the time being cast into journalism, at the height of grand apartheid. And, did I have an agenda? Yes, I had an agenda. My agenda was to expose whatever the apartheid government at the time was doing. But did that mean trying to spin stories in a particular direction? No. The easiest thing that you would do is actually just describe the scene that you saw without trying to say, look how terrible this is. I used to give lessons to political organizations at the time, who would issue press statements. And I'd say, guys, come, let me actually school you guys in terms of how to do this stuff. You don't need to say something like, the cold-blooded representative of the white settler regime brutally shot an innocent child in the back.
Yeah, that's a bit hectic.
Just say the policeman shot the child in the back. That's it. It's factual. You're not spinning it. But any reasonable person will say, why the hell is a cop shooting a child in the back? Because, ultimately that's what you want to get across. Facts matter at that level. But now, of course, we are living in a post-fact world where the way in which you spin things becomes more important than what you're actually reporting on.
Yeah, that's actually something. Sorry, that's actually something I wanted to ask you. Do you think, or in your own personal opinion, do you think that social media and internet has led to the downfall of good journalism?
No, I think bad journalism has led to the downfall of good journalism.
Explain.
Really simply, because as soon as you have the established media who insist on becoming players rather than reporters, then you have a crisis of credibility. And when you have that crisis of credibility, then you end up with declines in journalism. So when you have a scenario where the same publication will take an entirely different spin on a particular subject, depending on the race of the person that's involved. anyone can actually call bullshit on that.
Yeah.
Because, ultimately criminality is criminality, and it should not matter what the race or species is of the perpetrator.
Absolutely.
So that's the downfall of journalism. When you treat George Floyd as an example, with when it becomes a question of tinging it on the basis of race rather than highlighting that this is essentially police brutality. If you're telling a story of police brutality, everyone gets that immediately.
Yeah.
Is there anyone who finds it acceptable that a police officer kneels on a perp's neck for whatever period of time? The answer is no. But as soon as you make it about race, what you're doing is you're polarizing the entire nation, and that allows social media to then feed the flames of discontent, because that means that depending on what access you have to particular clicks on social media, you will follow that which most closely resonates with your own prejudices. I have my own prejudices, and my fundamental prejudice is that I hate most people, irrespective of race or color or creed.
Yeah, I think where I was coming from is like I've seen over the years with social media and digital media and stuff like that, like journalism just kind of took a turn where it's no longer about and there's a video that Denzel Washington went around for a while where he said something along news people don't look for facts anymore. It's just about putting out the story. Who can tell the story first? It's no longer about the facts, something like that. And I think somewhere along the lines over the past 10 years, maybe even 20, it's just about we need to put the most shocking headline out there so people get the clicks, so that our advertisers see it, or that our advertisers get seen. Same way social media works. It's all about the clicks and their advertising and stuff like that. So that's where I think journalism has been, it's just fallen at the wayside. Like nobody cares anymore about telling the truth. It's more about just, let's just put this story out there. We saw this at Cynical when the farmers, the media News 24 came out and said shots were fired by the farmers inside the court or whatever, and it wasn't true. The farmers didn't shoot anything. None of them had any weapons, but because it was sensational, because it was, News 24 knew, I'm going to get the clicks, they just put it out there, and they'd never retract anymore. That's the other thing. And I feel that also that hurts your integrity if you're not willing to say, you know what, we messed up, here's the real story. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. But it's a very good example, because the way in which one should have actually reported that is that shots were fired. If you actually have footage of people firing the shots, then you show that and let people draw their own conclusions. But as soon as you become effectively a witness to the proceedings from a point of view of wanting to convict someone, then you're not actually ticking the boxes of accuracy, objectivity, and fairness, which are very real concepts. Now, you'll find that most of your major media players in our country today think that accuracy, objectivity, and fairness are, relics from the colonial era, and they should be, ridden roughshod over. No, I'm a great fan of that stuff.
Yeah, thank goodness you are. I guess this leads me to my next question. In your honest opinion, do you think the art of true journalism, if we can put it that way, is there any saving it? Do you think there's going to be a time where journalists eventually will be like, you know what, we need to actually start reporting on the truth rather than doing this BS that we've been doing?
Look, I think that one of the things that's going to end up saving journalism is pretty much the stuff that you're doing right now. Because these individual platforms, be it on YouTube, be it on Telegram, be it on
Twitter,
TikTok,
Facebook,
TikTok. Yeah. Well, Twitter and Facebook are so heavily compromised that you can't actually put up
that's also true.
something that's really unbiased. But the fact is that there are a number of places where there are people who actually build credibility over a substantial period just simply because of the fact that they're playing by those rules. So I think Roman, for example, has been steadily upping his numbers around Morning Shot, and he's been doing exactly that. He just presents stuff and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, here's what we have. Make up your own mind."
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And so you now have a scenario where there's a number of those major players, particularly on YouTube, where if you look in terms of the engagement, you look in terms of the subscribers and the number of and just the reactions that they get, they're substantially outpacing lots of the mainstream media. And I think that that's going to be a pattern that's going to continue for quite a while. The interesting thing for me is going to be what happens when Trump enters the fray with his new media platform.
I did not know about that.
Trump has announced that he's going to be launching his own social media platform.
It's Gab. So, it has to be Gab. That's all he's going to do.
No. Here, no. Look, it's not going to be Gab. Gab's problem, by and large. Look, I lurk on Gab, just to follow what's going on. I've never actually posted anything there, and they have this whole idea that there's a conspiracy to wipe out Christendom and that kind of stuff, and it's not something that'll resonate with most average voters. I mean, the majority of the American populace actually are non-believers. As an example, and then there was Parler, but then again, Parler kind of dropped the. But you see, these guys have actually been held hostage by the likes of Apple and the Google Play Store, who basically said, "No, well, we're not going to allow your apps onto our platform."
Yeah, but that just kills them.
Yeah, but as the entire Pornhub empire has shown, you can actually build a successful media presence and completely ignore the fact that Apple and Google exist. Right?
That's also true.
Yeah. So the interesting thing for me is going to be what happens when you have the likes of Donald Trump, who actually have money to be able to bankroll their own media establishment. They have certainly the following that comes with it. So immediately you're literally going to have millions of people who will sign up just to hear what the Donald has to say. And if those platforms then become open to a significant chunk of independent players, I think that that's going to be the game changer. But the Chinese understand. The Chinese understand how powerful this is, which is why they control absolutely everything.
Yeah, well, also communism. And that's what the ANC is basically trying to do as well. I really hope we don't get to the point where the ANC starts controlling our internet, because that's now going to be, I know that's something they do in Cuba.
I'm reminded of that line from the movie Camelot, which no, sorry, it wasn't Camelot. It was Excalibur. Sorry, I'm confusing my Arthur Legend movies. But Uther Pendragon says, "Hope is for lovers. I need a sword to make me king."
That's a brilliant line, and I think that's something that Ramon Kabanek also lives by, because he's not a fan of hope either. Okay,
yeah,
so
something else that I'm fond of saying: good things come to an end, bad things have to be stopped.
That's very true. Yeah, apparently Ramon says he's not. I disagree with that. I think as long as you are factual, you can be credible, and the more followers you have, that also helps. So you are credible, Ramon. Just saying, giving you. Go subscribe to Morning Shot, by the way, if you haven't already. All right, Kanthan, we have 10 minutes left. I think we've covered quite a bit of ground. It's very interesting to hear your thoughts on media and all that. It's also Someone that has been in that industry for quite a long time and heavily invested in it, it's good to know that I'm not going crazy when I start to see these reporters that just seem to, like SABC. Sometimes I'm disgusted by the levels that they will go to race bait. Like they just go in that direction. It's black or white, and it's. I remember the one video that came out. They were interviewing these Afrikaners, I think, at a white squatter camp, and the journalist was just like, "Why aren't there black people here?" Just immediately trying to twist the situation, which was, I thought, disgusting. I think, or at least I hope, that people don't believe what they see.
Well, the ANC has always wanted a more equal society, and poverty is the great leveler, isn't it?
That's a scary thought. I funny enough, that's never dawned on me. Do you think that's what the ANC is trying to do? Create mass poverty?
Well, if you consider the history in terms of communism, so just take all of the major players in terms of people who've actually imposed death and destruction upon the masses. So you look in terms of Stalin, you look in terms of Mao, you look in terms of Pol Pot, you look in terms of Ceausescu, all of these guys, and that's essentially was their battle plan from the get-go. They would basically plow the fields and reduce everything to rubble, and then try and build a utopia out of that. And inevitably, that utopia was dystopia. It was just completely. I mean, you look at the mess that the Soviet Union became, just in terms of the sheer quantities of pollution, in terms of starvation, all of that stuff. The communism is people standing in line to get rations of food. That's fundamentally what it's about.
Dependent on the states as well, more than anything else. Some people would argue that that's actually there's a difference between communism and totalitarianism, and it's actually totalitarianism.
Yeah, this is the argument that communism will work. We just haven't done it right yet. And we've heard that. We've heard that tale many a time before.
I know. I don't think there's ever going to be a time when, because apparently what's supposed to happen is the government's supposed to give the entities and all that stuff, all the, the state-owned enterprises to the people, and then the people become equal, blah, blah, blah. I'm paraphrasing heavily. I don't think there's ever going to be a time where there's going to be a leader that has all that power, is just going to be like, you know what, I'm going to give it to the people. Now we'll have real communism. I don't think that's ever going to happen. And anybody who thinks that is going to happen is very misled. Very, very, very deeply misled.
Well, there was Gorbachev. No, I mean, just think about it. The guy literally went through the process of dismantling the entire apparatus of the Soviet Union. And the fact of the matter is that if you consider what happened at that point, was that the army generals then tried to actually rip that out from under him. Because remember, he was kidnapped and he was whisked away by Gennady Anaev's goons, which led to Boris Yeltsin then standing in front of the Kremlin in Moscow and unveiling a Russian flag and saying, this is not going to happen. And so the army actually led to an acceleration of the destruction of the Soviet Union into the Commonwealth of Independent States, as they called it at the time. But go back and look at Gorbachev's history, because the guy, I actually think in terms of the patterns of history at the time, and you look particularly in terms of the engagements that he had with Ronald Reagan at the time, and where he was saying, the Soviet Union needs to be pulled into the family of nations. And and he said to Ronald Reagan at the time, listen, why are you not giving us most favored nation most favored nation trading status. When you're giving it to China. If we have a Tiananmen Square ourselves, will you give it to us then? At which point, Ronald Reagan, who also was a smart guy, just, basically, recognized that he'd actually struck a chord with this guy. And look, if the process that had been started between Reagan and Gorbachev, because remember that was a process that was started on the basis of American strength. And, had that process actually gone through subsequent American presidencies without the interference of the Soviet military establishment, who knows where things would have ended up. You certainly would not have had the scenario where the oligarchs then took over and basically, the KGB ends up running the country.
Interesting. But we'll never know. That's the thing. We'll never know.
Sure.
I just have to address this. We got a super sticker. Thank you so much for euros, so I can pay rent at the end of May. This is great. Gotta love that exchange rate. So thank you so much, Mark, for the super sticker. Cool. So, Kanthan, you know what? You are quite a worldly man, and you know a lot of history, which I love. I love my history as well. One thing that I cannot understand, though, and maybe we can end off on this, is how do people not understand that communism is bad? How can people in South Africa specifically, advocate for EWC and defend it, and say like, yeah, but don't you think reform is correct and all that? And it boggles my mind when you come out and you say,
well, I've got to stop you. I've got to stop you right there, because most people don't agree with expropriation without compensation. If you look in terms of all of the research that particularly the Institute of Race Relations guys have done for the longest time, that expropriation without compensation is hugely unpopular with South Africans.
Well, I'm just using one example.
But what I'm trying to say is that if you use that as a model, almost all of those things, you will find that, contrary to popular opinion, that's not what the facts are.
Fair enough. You got me there. And I'm not trying to advocate for EWC. Let me make that very clear. But my point is that sometimes when I speak to the average South African, they say things that, okay, I'll give you a very good example. The other day I was at a protest, and there was this group of colored people, and they were saying that they want houses, down with capitalism, down, down, down. But in the same breath, they said down with EFF, down with ANC. Obviously not in favor of any politician to say, obviously they don't like the government. But it seems like, I don't know, I got this impression that the average South African is confused when it comes to certain, I don't know, messages from the ANC. So it feels like people don't realize that socialism, the people who follow the EFF, people who are loyal to the ANC, those people don't understand that the agenda is communism. And when you try and say that to them, they immediately turn around and say like, no, that's not true. It's not communism. And that's like what I don't understand. Do you have a comment on that?
Look, the biggest propaganda coup that was actually pulled off by communists by and large is to take crony corporatism and tell people that that's capitalism. So you consider, for example, the president of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa, he's not a capitalist, because basically everything that he's had has been handed to him on a plate on the basis of his black skin.
Yeah.
He hasn't earned any of that stuff. He was Secretary General of the National Union of Mine Workers, and sure, that's the shortcut to running a successful business, isn't it?
Mm.
So yes, certainly he's built up his entire wealth on that basis of actually being in the right place at the right time, and that's been the pattern pretty much throughout the entire continent. So, I mean, why is Isabella dos Santos the richest woman in Africa? Well, it's because of the fact that her father was president, and he then promptly appointed her to head up all of these corporations, which allowed her to then amass billions of dollars.
Mm.
And when people have the impression that that's capitalism, that's the point at which things kind of fall apart. But when you try and explain to them, well, the spaza shop that you buy stuff from every day, that's actually true capitalism. The minibus taxi driver who's transporting you to wherever you need to go on a daily basis, that's actually true capitalism. If you're a Zimbabwean economic refugee living in Tembisa and you need to get money to your family that's out in Bulawayo, and you make use of the underground network that gets money from you up to your family out there safely and securely, obviously for a fee, that's capitalism. And people get that. But as long as they're able to get away with the idea that the thieving that goes on at the highest echelons of society, and when we talk about that type of stuff, particularly all of the corruption that happened in the construction industry over particularly in terms of the contracts that were in place around the time of the FIFA World Cup. All of that corruption was actually crony corporatism, where it all involved kickbacks that ended up going to the political players. I mean, consider, for example, Medupi effectively gets handed to Hitachi in exchange for a 25% stake going to Chancellor House, which is the fundraising wing of the ANC. What value is being added to that? So, I mean, Hitachi, frankly, should be held up as international criminals for their role in terms of what went down at Medupi. But nobody speaks about the crony corporatism that actually undermines what happens in the country as a whole. Don't get me started on what happens in the likes of Naspers, as an example, because if you consider, the entire corruption that went down at SABC was actually facilitated by Naspers striking those deals with Claudio Motsoeneng. So wow. If they had not been there to actually facilitate his corruption, it never would have happened. So the question of trying to teach people the difference between true capitalism and crony corporatism, that's going to be an uphill battle. Generally, by and large, if you try and get people to buy into the idea of economic freedom, which again has been a concept that has been corrupted by the EFF, but you tell people that true economic freedom is the right to own your own money.
Yeah.
I think that becomes the strongest selling point. So, one of the ZACP points, for example, I know Roman speaks about this quite often as well. We strongly in favor of, instead of government actually running the departments, you hand the money down directly to the end consumer. So right now, education, for example, translates to roughly about 25,000 per pupil per year. Give that money to the parents and let them then spend it on getting their kids educated in the way that they think best. And yes, you're going to have one or two who are going to be spending it on booze and that kind of stuff. But by and large, the majority of people know how to spend their own money far better than government does.
That's true. That's very true. Or maybe something like BDL has been advocating for is vouchers.
Absolutely. Yeah. But again, vouchers, and the problem with vouchers is it then becomes an administrative burden. And as soon as you have that, I mean, really the easiest thing to do, firstly, make sure that everyone has a bank account, which is, an easy thing to do, and just EFT it into their bank accounts. And guess what? The economy will actually blossom immediately.
Oh, yeah. Education needs a big investment in this country. Education will lead to prosperity, and you have more people in the working force. People are qualified to do their jobs. All businesses then start to thrive and grow, and so on and so forth. Then people have more money, and when people have more money, they have more money to spend in the economy. It all drives. It's like a living ecosystem. And that's, again, like your point. It's amazing to me how people don't understand the difference between capitalism and cronyism and all that stuff. But ending off on this, I now understand, after what you, why you decided to call your party ZACP. I imagine it's because you like to have these kind of conversations, because, you know, capitalism, when you say capitalism in this country, for some people, it's almost like a swear word. It's like, oh, no, you can't say that. That's bad. That's, why you call yourself the capitalist party? No. You guys are X, Y, and Z, you know. But at least it opens up the door so you can try and convince people otherwise.
Absolutely, because it is a swear word in many sections of our society. But, you know, I think everyone who starts their own business, you know, is a capitalist. You know, if you're the person who's making sandwiches in your home to go and sell to kids outside the school, you're a capitalist.
Yeah.
And people totally get that, you know, immediately. You know, I'm always supporting these guys who are selling, you know, avos and things like that on the roadside, because, you know, to my mind, they're actually getting their asses out of bed in the morning, and they standing out there in that corner, and they actually trying to make a living. Yeah. And you look at the history in terms of entrepreneurship, and this is particularly the case in terms of immigrant populations. Because what they will generally end up doing is setting up businesses in the most inhospitable parts of the country. And they generally have one room, and they, you know, so they're selling stuff from there. They generally sleep under the counter at night. But that generation is then sending the next generation to school. And that generation that goes to school is going to send the next generation to college. And by the time the next generation comes along, that's where the CEOs are coming from.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then the generation after that then squanders the wealth, because, you know, they end up being woke. No, seriously. No, seriously. No, I see this happening in the case of the Oppenheimers, you know. Or you look at Dr. Seuss's descendants, who are now deciding that they you know, they're effectively killing the goose that lays the golden egg in order to appease people that they've never met and who would stab them in the back happily.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. We're seeing this woke culture, or woke cult, as I sometimes like to call it. And, you know, everything or anything can be offensive now. I think it's very difficult to be a comedian, because you can't imitate certain accents, and you can't say certain things. And, you know, if you step
are you good at doing accents, by the way?
I've been nervous to do accents, man, because, like, I can't do accents. I can't. Well, it's not that I can't, like, I'm not able to. I can't, in the sense of, like, if I imitate, for example, I don't know, if I do a black accent or a colored accent or something, I'm scared that people are going to cancel me. Like, they'll be like, oh, that's black accent or whatever, you know, and it's ridiculous.
You mean you haven't been canceled yet? So what am I even doing on the show?
Actually, well, I had a brush with the cancel culture at the beginning of last year, just after the lockdown, for being a Trump supporter, apparently, which apparently is a crime. So, yeah, it was still fighting in court with that. But yeah, it's that was pretty much when that happened. I realized, like, I wasn't even standing on stage advocating for Trump. I wasn't even at that point on the show, even on this show, I hadn't advocated for Trump. And yet somehow, because I retweeted something of a journalist saying that journalism is lying about Trump, that now, like, it just, everybody, some comedians started messaging me like, are you a Trump supporter, Joe? How could you? I did the worst, like I killed their dog or something. It was the most surreal thing ever. It's so weird. And yeah, that's why now I'm like, this woke culture, this woke cult, it on this channel, I'm heavily against it. So yeah, you never have to worry about that with me. You're free to say whatever you want. And ZACP,
well, I can't wait for President Harris, frankly.
Yeah, Me neither. I think ZACP. I do love a lot of its policies or principles. I think the freedom of speech thing is something very close to me. Capitalism. Everything you've said today or tonight is definitely favorable, and something that I just want to see more of you. And I think a lot more of you. I know you say you don't like doing the press releases, and you're gonna eventually start putting things in place. So let me say this: we look very much forward, or at least I look very much forward to seeing more of the purple cow, hopefully wrecking things like in a china shop at Parliament.
I think that's a good note to end this on. Yep.
Fantastic. Kanthan Pillay, I'm going to end off the show. You're welcome to stay on until I'm done. It's only a few minutes, or if you have to go, I understand. I'll chat to you a bit later. But either way, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Sorry that we went a little bit over time, but it was one hell of a great conversation. Thank you so much. If there's anything you want to say as we end off, you're welcome to.
No, I'd just like to, there's a lot of people who've been asking me why I've been so quiet on Twitter in particular. And the fact of the matter is that, it was a significant chunk of the day that I was spending on Twitter and I understand that I was sharing ideas that lots of people actually benefited from. But, ultimately, if you look in terms of the cost benefit analysis, it was a question of whether I could be spending that time more productively doing other stuff. And by and large, that has been the case. And I think that I've actually been far more productive being off Twitter than actually being in that space. I still lurk, so I just go in every morning and check at what people are saying and stuff like that. But I'm just not contributing as I used to in the past. But certainly once you put up a link to this show, I will go in and tweet that.
Oh, fantastic! Thank you. Cool. Kanthan, I'll chat to you just now. Thank you again so much for joining me on the show. And I'll definitely chat to you again and hopefully have you back on the show whenever it is that you have some time on your hands. Thanks so much. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Kanthan Pillay, head of the ZACP, entrepreneur and media media expert, if I could put it that way. It was one hell of a conversation. I really enjoyed it. I think ideas were shared, things were put out into the world, and hopefully giving you something to think about with the current situation of mainstream media in South Africa and media in general. Remember to always look for the truth, ladies and the moment you start being told what the truth is from someone who's supposed to be unbiased, start asking questions. But then again, maybe you should always be asking questions. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you guys so much for tuning in. To everyone who gave a super chat, thank you so much. Don't forget to go check out rebelstoreza.com if you're still here. Also, if you like the show, you want to support the channel, please consider giving a donation. Links are in the description as we speak, and give this video a like. If you're new to my channel, subscribe. Don't forget to check out that Telegram channel. Again, it's a channel, not a group. Big difference. Tomorrow I will be back on the show. We're going to be roasting the headlines. Comedians roast the headlines. That's right, it's all a laugh. So please come join us then. And if I don't see you there, ladies and gentlemen, stay safe, be kind to one another, and I'll see you at the next one. Cheers.